Well, let's get straight into it with James Healy, who's the political correspondent of The Spectator. And it's not a political matter, James, but I know you have opinions and insights on Gregg the Grouper. That is what The Sun is saying today, with the Grouper in inverted commas. Incredibly serious allegations now that he was accused last night of groping 3 different women. A flood of new allegations against the MasterChef host. One former contestant even alleged he groped her while she was cooking on the set of the show, and the cameras rolled. Lots of questions for Gregg Wallace. His lawyers have made clear that he denies any sexual impropriety. But plenty of questions for the BBC too as well, James.
Absolutely, and I think as with all these stories when they come out, you know, there are a few initial allegations and people say, well, what's so bad about this, etc. And then often more serious allegations then come out and claims such as you say there, Peter, sexual assault and harassment as well. It all started sort of a couple of days ago when the BBC first reported sort of claims of inappropriate comments. And I think some people were then sort of moved to say, well, you know, was this just bad banter in a wrong light? But obviously these are much more serious. And it does seem to be, you know, part of a long running theme. And over these allegations stretch for many different years, many different instances. So I think the BBC are going to have to take a real look at that, given that how long Gregg Wallace was on air, given how popular MasterChef was and how much the BBC supported that. I think there are a lot more questions than answers. And I suspect this is going to be a matter that is solved over months, if not years.
12 years as well. We've known about these, or the BBC anyway, and the production company has known about these allegations for 12 years. I mean, this is just astonishing. Emma Kennedy was a contestant on Celebrity MasterChef. She complained 12 years ago about it. And I don't know about you, James, but it just seems that this keeps happening, really. It just seems that there are senior BBC presenters accused of things that are sometimes an open secret. I'm not talking about Hugh Edwards' paedophilia. That was something they didn't know about, but they did know about his behaviour. Many complaints were made about his behaviour in regard to younger male staff. And now we have Emma Kennedy saying that she reported Wallace's groping to the BBC 12 years ago. He tried to intimidate me, says Clemmy Moody in The Sun as well. And the fact that there are many people, including Penny Lancaster, who is, of course, a celebrity in her own right and a model and presenter and all the rest of it, but also Rod Stewart's wife. And there's just an awful lot of allegations flying around that appeared to be an open secret. I mean, this just keeps happening again and again and again, particularly in regard to the BBC.
Yes, and I think that some stars regard themselves as untouchable. Clearly, I think the BBC doesn't want to get itself into any trouble, so I think sometimes maybe they don't take enough steps to resolve this at source when these are sort of more less serious incidents. And then obviously the danger is then that allows more serious behaviour to grow up in that sort of vacuum there. I think that, you know, every media company is very keen to protect its stars. They don't want to have bad headlines. They don't want to sort of lose their talent. But if they're acting in an appropriate way, there is only one course of action, and that is to do proper safeguarding, ensure the contestants and staff are respected, and they need to make sure that all allegations are thoroughly investigated. So I think that although it may be hard to sort of cut this off at source and sort of intervene early on, that is the right thing to do, because you end up with what we have now, sort of very serious claims, very serious issues, and front page of national newspapers demanding that things be investigated properly.
Another allegation is that Gregg Wallace has been accused by a former colleague of making racist comments. And this is a former staff member claiming that Wallace made offensive Asian remarks on the set of MasterChef. It's not going very well for him. They allegedly included making kung fu fighting noises and comments such as me, well, I'm actually not going to read that out at this time in the morning, but it comes following a 4-month Telegraph investigation which this week exposed allegations that he made sexually inappropriate comments on set, made staff feel uncomfortable by taking his clothes off as well. What happens now, James? It would be very, very hard for Gregg Wallace to come back from this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, even if that he hasn't committed any kind of criminal offence in law, the allegations are so bizarre. I mean, there's that. There's also the lesbian colleague of his who he kept asking about what it was like to have lesbian sex, which just seems impolite and very inappropriate in a work setting, even if, you know, it wouldn't say perhaps fall under a criminal offence. It just seemed very odd behaviour. So I'm not really sure how he can come back on air and be restored to, shall we say, this kind of cuddly greatness that MasterChef bestowed on him. So I suspect that he won't appear again on MasterChef, not least, of course, because
we know the episodes that he has filmed, because MasterChef is being shown at the moment. Those will continue to be shown. They're all pre-recorded. It's not as if they're still being recorded now. It's not as if he's still being employed by the BBC or anybody else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suspect he won't work for the BBC again. And there will probably be an investigation, maybe one or two people, heads will roll. But I sadly don't think that much will change in terms of the internal BBC culture, the wider media culture, and we'll see something else happen further down the line.
James, thank you for your thoughts on that. I want to turn to politics now because assisted dying has been the huge debate. The vote has been won. 330 MPs voted for it, 275 against yesterday. We now go into the stage of line-by-line consideration in the committee stage of that. But, of course, many of the opponents of it, both in Parliament and elsewhere, not backing down on this and saying that they will keep fighting.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were contributions to the speeches. I was in the House of Commons yesterday listening to those. They said, look, well, we don't want this bill to go through if it's in this current form, but we believe in hearing its general principles out, and we want it to go forward and give it a second reading for it to be amended. And so that was the argument made by people like David Davis, who said, well, I'm not fully convinced there yet, but I want to go and amend it and make sure it's pretty watertight. So we'll wait to see what that's going to happen. I was in the chamber. It was quite a moment. Normally when a vote is read out, you hear a loud roar on one side or the other, but it was an absolute pin drop moment in the Commons. And I think that reflected the gravity of the situation. A majority of 55 backed it. That is a pretty strong majority. I suspect that even if, say, 10 or 20 sort of switch or whatever, it'll still pass. And it just does go now to the kind of scrutiny and making sure it's as tough as possible. And we wait to see the kind of committee and who's going to be on that committee, how many supporters, how many opponents of assisted dying. But I suspect it's going to be a pretty strong pro-majority. And I therefore think it looks likely at this stage it's going to pass into law.
Let us know what you think about the assisted dying vote. 0344 499 1000. I wonder what you make of the position of Keir Starmer, James, actually, in regard to this, because he's got a new Transport Secretary. That's Heidi Alexander, the godmother of ULEZ, when she was Deputy Mayor of London. She's now an MP for Swindon South. I wonder, in regard to the Louise Hay affair, the fact that the former Transport Secretary resigned yesterday morning, is there more to this? Because we know that the allegations against her about, well, she lost her phone and then found it again and then the police were involved. Well, actually, we know that there are at least 3 phones that she said that she had lost and then were magically found again here. And I just wonder how much we know about what Keir Starmer knew when, because he's, of course, lectured us a lot, and indeed the Conservative Party, about being incredibly transparent, Mr. Rules and all the rest of it. But he knew that she had broken the law. He knew that she'd had a criminal conviction. OK, it's a spent conviction. But nonetheless, when this, I mean, nothing's really changed in terms of what the facts are, it would appear, yet Keir Starmer threw the Transport Secretary under a bus.
Yeah, and it looks like, he's been railroaded as well. Look, I mean, on Thursday night, there was this discussion between Louise Haig's camp and Number 10, at which they then sort of talked it all over. And it appears that, according to Number 10's side, there were discrepancies in the original story that Louise Haig told in 2020 on being appointed by Keir Starmer to the shadow cabinet and what is now being said. I was noted with interest the reports from Sky and The Times, which broke this story, in which they talked about perhaps, this was part of other allegations as well, lots of phones going missing potentially, and the fact that clearly I think some of her colleagues at Aviva, where she used to work when this was all happening, an insurance firm, were slightly disgruntled with her. So I think that there potentially is more to the story. The 2 aspects for me are sort of what happened in the original 2014 incident, and second of all, of course, what Keir Starmer knew and when, because the danger is that it was either he stood by his decision in 2020 to appoint her, or he is now only getting it wrong when the media has found out. So I think there are sometimes a bit more questions for him to answer. And then, can Labour move the story on? I suspect he wouldn't want to have too many grillings, but I think it would be a good subject to go on at next week's PMQs.